In this session, let us understand the chemical composition of a chromatin. Chemically, the chromosomes are nucleoprotein in nature. That means they contain nucleotides and protein. The nucleotides here are the RNA and DNA and the proteins. Generally, these chromosomes contain about 30% to 40% of DNA, 0.5 to 10% of RNA, and 50 to 65% of protein. All these together constitute a chromosome or a chromatin. Let us understand each of the components. The first one is DNA. The amount of DNA which is present in somatic cell, it will always be constant, and in the case of a gametic cell, it is always half of the somatic cell. This characteristic feature or the content of DNA which is constant is called as C value. And in the case of the diploid cell, it will be 2C, and in the case of haploid cells, it will be 1C. And in case of some of the tissues such as liver, it may be in a polyploid condition, that is the DNA will be in 4C or 8C. The DNA of chromosome is of two types. One is the unique DNA and the other is repetitive DNA. The unique DNA is the DNA sequence which is present in single copy per genome, and they are unique, that is they do not get repeated, hence they are non-repetitive DNA. These will code for proteins in large quantity, for example the storage proteins, whereas the repetitive DNA, as the name suggests, gets repeated several times. So these DNA nucleotides will be present in several to million copies per genome. And in human genome, they are about 30% repetitive DNA. The repetitive DNA can further be classified into two more types. One is highly repetitive and the other is moderately repetitive DNA. The next one is RNA. The purified chromatin, they will contain about 0.5 to 10% of RNA. And these RNA, they remain associated with chromosome in the form of messenger RNA, transfer RNA, and ribosomal RNA. And lastly, the proteins. The proteins remain associated with chromosome in two broad groups. One is the histone proteins or basic proteins, and non-histone proteins are called as acidic proteins. These histone proteins, they constitute about 80% of total chromosomal protein, and they seem to be present in 1:1 ratio with DNA. This is the picture of the nucleosome in which you can see the histone proteins. There are 5 fractions of histones and they are 1H1, 2H2A, 2HB, 2H3 and 2H4. Here the H1 protein is present once and the remaining proteins are present twice. This is the H1 protein or the H1 histone, and the remaining are the H2A histone, H2B histone, H3 histone and H4 histone. These are repeated twice. The next one is the non-histone protein, which constitutes about 20% of total proteins. The content of this non-histone protein will differ from species to species, and these may include enzymes such as DNA and RNA polymerases. Thank you.